The Holy Gospel according to St. John, the 13th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
When he had gone out, Jesus said, "Now the Son of Man has been glorified, and God has been glorified in him. If God has been glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and will glorify him at once. Little children, I am with you only a little longer. You will look for me, and as I said to the Jews, so now I say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Please be seated. There are those times in our lives when we get pushed out of our comfort zone, don't we? I think for all of us together over the last 6 weeks, that's been one of those times. I know I have been way outside of my comfort zone, and I didn't realize how far outside the comfort zone I was until this thing was all over. And yesterday morning, we didn't wake up till like 8:30, which I haven't seen 8:30 on the clock in a long, long time. Usually 6:15, 6:30 at the latest we're up. You know, that's what happens when God starts leading us in a different direction that maybe we're not comfortable with, or we get confronted with a topic or an issue or direction that just isn't something we see for ourselves. In our reading from Acts, Peter is taken outside of his comfort zone. He's explaining why all of a sudden now the ministry of the apostles has expanded outside of the faithful, the people of Israel. Why now those who are uncircumcised, those who are believed to be pagans, the Gentiles, why they would be taking the word of God to them. So God is pushing those apostles and the early church, as so often God pushes us in our work, to go outside of our comfort zone, to do more than what we think we should be doing, but to trust in God to lead us to where we need to be. But the topic that I think that pushes us outside our comfort zone the most in life is the topic of death. And that's where Jesus is at in our gospel lesson today. And it's an appropriate theme. We're brought back again to the time right before Jesus would go on the cross. And he's with his apostles, and he's preparing them, and he's reminding them of all the things he's taught them, and he's beginning to get them ready for that moment that he will be with them no longer. So he says to them, "My little children, in a little while you will see me no more. Where I am going, you cannot come." Yet is the unspoken part of that phrase. But he's clearly getting them ready for that difficult moment when they're going to be looking at him on the cross, and they're going to have to place him in the grave. Death is an uncomfortable topic. Having to face that time in our life is challenging. We often set aside important tasks like writing a will and making arrangements because death is so far outside of our comfort zone. And I've noticed some things recently, and I've had some discussions with people in the death industry, the funeral industry, about our concerns for this. We see trends that are going on throughout communities and throughout the world that are leading people so far outside their comfort zone that they're not dealing well with death or doing the things that are necessary to go through the process and the emotions that eventually bring healing when we lose someone. In the olden days, when somebody died, it stopped everyone's lives in their tracks. All of a sudden, they would take off from work because they had to go to the wake and they had to go through the funeral. Now, more often than not, I see people, families, scheduling funerals when it's convenient and fits into the life and the work schedules of all the people who might be involved in the funeral. That's a big concern, because death is inconvenient. Part of having to stop our lives is a reminder to us that death is a rude intruder, that death is an unwelcome guest,
And when we have to face it in that way, it provokes those questions of life that lead to faith. What is my life about? Why am I here? Where am I going? Right? We ask those questions all the time. What's heaven like? What's it like when we die? Does our body go on the ground and our spirit go to heaven and then we're reunited at the resurrection? And you've got the questions. You know what they are. But all too often, because it's outside our comfort zone, we want to avoid it. I also see many times when death comes upon a family or someone where there's a desire just to get it over with quickly. If we're not going to do it and schedule it conveniently, then let's not go through the process of visitation. Let's just go for a direct cremation or we'll just get together at the graveside in a few weeks and we'll lay it to rest, and that'll be the end of it. And again, that's a serious step that misses out on the important aspect of dealing with death that helps us get through the challenges and the difficulty. That process of visitation, of the funeral, is about the living. It's about reminding ourselves that even though death is this rude intruder, we are not alone, and we need each other as an extended family, a family of faith to get through these challenges. And so I continue to encourage you. Yeah, we don't need those 2 days of visitations that drag on and on like it used to be in the olden days, but taking some time, whatever it may be, a brief moment to spend time with loved ones, and then come into the presence of God, especially in the church for a funeral. That's really important because it helps us get through the process. If you don't want to deal with a funeral home, that's okay. What we've started to do, and I encourage this, is that if we're going to have a church funeral and we're going to lay to rest somebody you love, we can do visitation here before that. Maybe take an hour or two, look at pictures, share stories, spend time with each other, and then come into the presence of God's house and go through the liturgy that points us to Jesus. There's a story of 2 horses that are in a field, and when you look at the 2 horses from a distance, they look to be very similar and have a lot in common. But as you get closer to the horses, as you get into the field, you realize that one of the horses is blind. And the owner of the horses didn't want to put the horse down. Even though his life would be greatly restricted by the blindness, instead what the owner of the horses did is he got the other horse and he put a bell around the neck of the other horse. And he always had it that these 2 horses were together, right, in stables next to each other. And what happened then is that the horse who could see, the horse with the bell, began to slowly lead and constantly ring the bell on his neck so that the horse that couldn't see could follow. And you would observe the 2 horses, and as the one that could see with the bell would start going back towards the stables, he would stop every few moments, look back for the other horse, and then if the other horse wasn't coming, ring the bell around his neck until they finally got together back into the stable. This is what Jesus is getting at in our gospel lesson today. This is what he was preparing the apostles for. Where I am going, you cannot come yet. But where I am going, I will take you to be with me. Death is uncomfortable. It pushes us out of that comfort zone. It's not something we want to deal with. But Jesus has been there and overcome it for us. That's what Easter is about, and that's why it's at the heart of our faith. And like that seeing-eyed, bell-ringing horse leading the blind one through those difficult challenges of life, that's what Jesus does for us. Those are the promises that God gives to us. That's what it means for Jesus to go to the cross and the empty tomb. In our reading from Revelation today, we come to the conclusion of the Bible. Remember, John, the gospel writer, is the author of Revelation, And just like Moses in Genesis was given the privilege of seeing what it was like at the beginning with creation, John in the Revelation is given the gift of God of seeing what it is like in heaven in eternal life. And as John looks ahead, as he closes out the words of sacred scripture, he has one goal and desire: to remind us of the assurances that God gives us when those questions of death arise. We may not be able to answer all those technical ones about heaven and what happens and where's our spirit and all these things. But what God does tell us is everything we need to know. See, the home of God is among mortals. He will dwell with them, they will be his peoples, and God himself will be with them. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Mourning and crying and pain will be no more, for the first things have passed away.